Hey one, this is Elon here, and I'm back with another Servant Wanted, but this time it is a bit different because I decided to make it a podcast. Because recent video I did, which was the Santa Claus Servant Wanted, I had some really big problems with editing. It took me literally 2 days to edit that video because my computer had problems to rendering it. It crashed. It was literally a hell for me. So to spare myself that struggle and that insane work for a small video, I decided to make this a podcast instead. And when I have a better computer, when I have better gear and stuff like that, I will go back to do these videos instead. But for now, I make this into a podcast, talking here a little bit about this servant wanted. And today's servant is someone I've been wanting to talk for quite a while about actually. It's a servant that appeared in Fate Total War I did talk about quite a while back ago. Fate Total War, for those that doesn't know, is an concept idea I made that is similar to a Fate Apocrypha that I thought about way before I actually started watching it. But in there is a servant called Vercingetorix that is the character of today's Servant Wanted. And Vercingetorix was a Gaul chieftain that was a war leader that united the tribes in Gaul against Rome and Julius Caesar. And he became quite a big legend out of that. And I wanted to make him a servant for quite a while because I feel like, dang, that would be awesome. So here I am, talking about it. And of course, before we do really anything Fate Grand Order-ish of this, I want to go through a little bit about his history. I don't know of course everything to 120%, but I tried to read up quite a bit at least, so I have some information about the historical person and all of that. And yes, in 58 BC was Gaul, aka now France, under attack from Rome. And you do know that Rome did pretty much conquer and attacked big parts of this world and Europe and all of that. And of course, Gaul was known different. And Julius Caesar used his very famous tactics, divide and conquer, to rule even more of Gaul and the surrounding nations. And the Gauls, of course, tried to revolt against this, but they failed. Even when the young Vercingetorix, a noble of the Gauls, tried to unite the tribes to fight against the Romans, the most nobles actually declined because they felt that it was too much of a risk to fight the Romans, because the Romans were big, they're having a good army, they were strong, and these nobles felt like, no, we don't want to mess with this, they are dangerous. So Vercingetorix actually turned to something different. Then instead of asking for help from the nobles, he actually asked the people itself, the poor people and the people that really did suffer under the power of the Romans. And he would take a town called Gergovia. There we go, I'm terribly sorry. Where he was hailed as a king among the people. And of course from there, he did form an alliance with different tribes and formed an army that just grew as he fought against the Romans, because as soon as he did that, the Gauls saw like, oh shit, we have a dude that is actually fighting these, and he's doing it good, And he actually did adapt the use of an early form of scorched earth tactic. And for those that doesn't know what that is, it is literally that they burn everything. They burn the ground, they burn down buildings and everything, so the enemy troops can't get anything from the nature, from the grounds, from the land, anything to make them able to sustain the army, because that is how an army, especially back then, did survive as long as they could do, because they didn't bring too much supplies themselves. They took the supplies from the country they were attacking, they were conquering and all of that. And I think that is a very gruesome but effective way to, of course, stop that. And of course, by doing that, the Roman legions had trouble to actually sustain themselves in Gaul and all of that. The problem is, of course, that Gaul itself would have problems, but hey, if we suffer, those damn Romans gonna suffer as well. Vercingetorix would lead the army to fight against the Romans in many heavy battles, and in one of these is the battles against Gergovia, the city he took over just a while back, and the Romans put it under siege. However, they were the actual one that lost heavy on that one. But Vercingetorix's cavalry did suffer quite a lot as well, so instead of actually following up and try to hunt down the Romans, they retreated back as well and into the stronghold that was named Alesia. And in the Battle of Alesia was the last battle for Vercingetorix, as the stronghold became under siege by the Romans. After all of these many battles, I can't go through all of them, but it was quite a lot of battles where he effectively fought against the Romans. this would became definitely his last battle. And the thing is that the Romans, of course, did as they did good. They besieged Alesia with Vercingetorix and his troops in there. And even if the rest of the Gaul troops and all of that appeared behind the Romans, so literally the Romans were stuck between a rock and a hard place because their troops were aimed at the stronghold, but they also had Gauls behind them. Yet they actually didn't break, and it was because Vercingetorix was still stuck in Alesia, so he could not convey his orders to the troops outside. And even if the Romans became weak, and of course that is quite naturally, they became weak, and they probably would have broken if it was not because Julius Caesar himself actually led his reserves legions into battle. And thanks to that, Romans will put Alesia under siege and win that war against Vercingetorix and his Gauls. And then there is a bit of different historical moments on how it all ended, but the general and more accepted story is that to spare the people of Alesia and his troops there, did Vercingetorix ride out into Roman camp up to Caesar and dismounted and surrendered himself right to the emperor, simply to spare his troops and the people of Alesia. And years later would Vercingetorix be killed in prison, most likely strangled as they do generally in these eras in this time. And by that meaning that the great warrior of Gaul didn't die in battle, but most likely in a very, very dark cell, far from the glory of the battlefield, and die as Julius Caesar simply stood there victorious. Now, of course, it's not an entire story of Vercingetorix, it's quite a lot of it actually, so I suggest people to read about it. It's very interesting to read about the Gauls and all of that. And I think it's very interesting though, if I'm wrong about something in this story, please write it down and tell me, and I'll try to learn at least. I make mistakes, of course, and I hope to just get better at it. Not to make more mistakes, of course, but to learn from it. There we go. I'm wording it pretty bad. And then, of course, we're going over to classes. There's 3 classes I could see him be: Rider, Lancer, and Saber. I mean, he was a great warrior, and I'm pretty dang sure that he was prominent with both spear and sword, as I've been seeing arts and all of that. And then, of course, Rider would also fit, considering you see him ride out there to the seas and all that. It's very last moment, very heroic kind of stuff to do and all that. But I decided for this podcast to mainly focus on him as Lancer, because, I don't know, I like the Lancers. I want to see more Lancers and different one, and I have some ideas I think fit more to the Lancer kind of class than Rider or something like that for this one. But of course, as I said, I could see him as a Rider and Saber as much as I could see him as a Lancer. He's not one of these servants that I could see very defined to be like a Saber or a Rider or something like that. I could see him as quite a lot of different physically styled warriors kind of classes, so to speak. And then of course we go to abilities and powers, or rather passives we're gonna start with. First one, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, so I might not be correctly how to use these passives and all that. But the first one is magic resistance that many Lancers do have, giving a little increase to resistance towards debuffs and all of that. And as I mentioned, this is more Fate Grand Order style. This would work out differently if it was in a Fate's Day Night setting or something like that, you know? If it's in an anime or in a story and all of that. Now this is more gameplay focused and all. And the second passive of 2, well, he had 2 passives here, is Roman Defiance. This is more a flavor thing, actually. I think it would be more fun if they added more of this kind of stuff. And this Roman Defiance is that he do 5% more damage against Roman servants and units. Or they could even lessen that. It doesn't need to be much. It's just more a flavor thing, you know, that Vercingetorix, of course, he fought against the Romans. That was the main enemy and all. And this is a buff I could see Boudicca has as well, you know. Because she also fought against the Romans. They were the arch enemies. They became her death and all. And I think it doesn't need to be a big ass buff that is overwhelming and like make it OP that, oh nay, we're gonna fight Romans, I need this character. It's more like, oh well, it's a little bit of a flavor thing, you know. It doesn't need to be overwhelming. It's still for those that absolutely would min-max every single little piece of thing, would like, okay, I'm gonna take Vercingetorix because we're gonna kick some near ass. Which would actually be quite good if Vercingetorix definitely would be a Lancer. I think that would be quite fun. And all that. But yes, I think that would be an interesting little passive. And that is something I want to see more of. A little bit unique things like that. Passives that interact in different way with different characters and classes, or people from different nations, or somehow interact differently with just a little plain buff on your debuff rating or something like that. I think it could be a little bit more thing that could do with all of this. And for the skill, I don't have any rough numbers, because first of all, I'm not very into exactly making these numbers like fine-tune. Of course, then if this would be a character, they would do some beta testing or whatnot, you know, to make this not too OP or too underwhelming and all of that. And the first skill would be Scorched Earth. I mean, being the one of those that utilize this kind of tactic in the early days of this kind of skill tactic thing, it's pretty awful still, but you know, I thought it would be a quite nice ability, a skill for him. And this grants a burn debuff for all enemies for 3 rounds. It doesn't do massive damage to them, it's more like a slow ticking damage on them. But for 1 round as well as it is thrown, it causes a defense down debuff on them as well. Because, I mean, if you're on fire, it's pretty hard to actually be active like, I'm on fire! So I decided like, that could be quite an interesting thing to have, giving a little bit of play to the meaning and the power of Scorched Earth, so to speak. And there's also a reason for this, as I will explain with his Noble Phantasm as well. And the second skill is Inspiration. I mean, he was a man that united the Gauls, he was a powerful and charismatic chieftain and all of that. And I could see him easily having this ability. It simply is giving an boost to all his allies in the group with a small MP gain and a little buff to attack. It's nothing overwhelming, but it's, you know, giving a little bit of a boost, you know, prepared to annihilate enemies and all. And the third one is a skill that I've been thinking a bit on, and it's one of these new things I would love to see in Fate Grand Order. And this one is called Spearhead. When you're activating this Spearhead skill, it greatly increases your own attack for maybe 3 rounds. And for 1 round, as you activate it, it will pierce an enemy and do 50% of all the damage. You can tune that number for more or lower, and damage that enemy behind the first target. And that only works for regular attacks and not MP. But the idea of this is that if you, for example, you're fighting 3 enemies, you're targeting the first one, activating this skill, and do 2 attacks with Vercingetorix with his spear. Then you do full damage to the first character as normal, but then also 50% of that damage goes to the second one behind him. Doing, if they want, they could do it so it's 50%, 25% only, 100% or whatever. And I would probably not most likely allow, I would not think crits. So if you crit the first one, you won't crit the second one, you do just base damage. I think this would be quite a cool thing. I mean, after all, a spear is weapon known for piercing and impaling multiple enemies and things like that. And while it would be a very good AoE ability, of course, but if it's one single enemy, it's useless in that regard. That is why it's nice with this attack buff. Or if you target the last enemy in the group of 3, you won't hit anything because there's no one behind him, so to speak. So it would be kind of balanced through that, and I think it's, you know, I think it would be quite cool. Maybe it's just me, but I would love to see Fate Grand Order, Aniplex, and the Lightwork, or whatever they're called, to do a bit of experiment with these kind of things, you know. It doesn't need to be overwhelming stuff, just stuff that makes it be different than like, a buff to attack, buff to MP there, debuff defense. Something that makes you think a little bit, making, you know, a bit interactive. So in this case, with these skills, Vercingetorix would definitely be a very good AoE character, of course. And as well, pretty good to buff. He gives a good little buff, but also very good at debuffing and hurting and AoEing his enemies and all of that. And for his MP, I had quite an interesting idea, at least in my opinion, which I think would be quite fun. Very simple in its way, but I will actually like this as it is, and it's named for God. I know this is not a very impressive name or something like that, but that was the best thing I could come up with, and it's an anti-army AoE kind of MP that is a little bit inspired from Robin Hood's, actually. because this Vercingetorix that united the Gauls, he stands there with his spear and throws it, so he pierces through all the enemies and doing damage to all enemies on the battlefield. However, if they are also affected by burn, will this burn explode, dealing even more damage to all the characters affected by it. So I think it would be something like combining the skills of Scorched Earth and all of that to make this even more effectful. And I had another idea of this as well, which was that if he uses MP, throw this spear, and he kills someone that is affected by this fire, the fire explodes, causing damage to others surrounding them. That could also be a thing that you're doing quite high damage, but if you kill someone on the burn effect, they explode and deal massive damage to surrounding enemies and all of that. And that could cause a chain reaction, which also would be quite cool and a little bit different from Robin Hood's MP, so it doesn't too much the same maybe. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Piercing through, do lots of damage if they die, or if we go with the first one, they do take more damage if they're on the burn. Or in the second case, they explode if they die with this fire debuff and all. I think that could be quite awesome thing, and I would actually like to see more of this kind of interaction. Make it a bit more fun, you know, a bit more strategic than like, okay, just pressing the button and execute an MP, but thinking like, oh shit, do I have the debuffs on? Do I work this out and all of that? But, well, I think at least it could be quite interesting. And that is for now of me and my concept of Vercingetorix as a servant. I personally would love that, to see Vercingetorix as a servant in this Fate Grand Order, or Fate in general, actually, because he's such a character that have been part of the world and against the Romans and all that. And I would actually love that, because I would love to see Vercingetorix in the game, because first of all, I would actually love to have an interaction between Vercingetorix and Boudicca, to have these two standing united against the Romans, because both of them suffered greatly under the Romans, and of course, both of them have this really, really big hate against them. If they see Julius Caesar, Nero, something like that, they will be like, yeah, fuck them, we're gonna fuck them over. And I think that would be awesome, and I think it's in general the kind of things that I personally would like to see. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The Vercingetorix as a servant. Hopefully, maybe in the future we get, probably not, because Vercingetorix is one of these kind of historical characters that probably will be ignored by DV and all of that. But still, though, I think it's nice to have it out in the open, throw it out like this, and maybe if people get interesting and they see it like, oh man, people are interested in this. But yes, I think that will be enough of this, and I'm terribly sorry once again, this is not a real video, it's just a podcast like this, but for me this is way, way easier to work with without killing my computer slowly, and general, I think it's pretty nice anyways, and hopefully this is something for people to listen to. Me just bailing and whiling and whatever I'm doing here about the Vercingetorix and future servants. And, well, yeah. That is a future project. I do have that. As soon as I get my, a better computer gear and all of that, so I can edit it, I will be back with that. But for now, this is what we have. And yeah, I will be back though with more Servant Wanted. So thank you for watching. See you later on. Have a continued super great day.